Welcome, one and all. It's another beautiful day here in Southern Colorado. So I figured I would do this episode of Solutionaries outside and enjoy some sunshine and some wind and no mosquitoes right now. So want to thank all of you for joining me. I'm really happy today because it's kind of an opportunity to circle back around with someone I had talked very briefly with in the past when we were starting to first launch Regenerative Media TV. And I had the opportunity to see him recently at the Global Capital Network event in Newport Beach, California, where it was an opportunity for projects and organizations and businesses to have an opportunity to bridge and meet with potential investors. So he's very dynamic. He has his hands in a lot of things, and I'm really amazed with what I got to know him through, which is EV World. So today I want to welcome on Solutionaries, Mr. David Neese. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely,
So it was,
absolutely.
it was nice meeting you there. It was interesting because I got to meet a lot of people that are in, the green space that were there presenting, and so that it was quite a unique event.
Absolutely. I think if I remember correctly, they had a new electric vehicle that was being kind of launched there. And then, of course, all sorts of other technologies along with products, people. And, I find going to a lot of these events, sometimes they're not always mission aligned. There was a lot of people there pitching to the military and different things. But I'm really excited about getting traction with Professor Tratner and you and others as far as doing this October a green summit that'll bring in investors more in the sustainability, green, and impact funding space. But nonetheless, we're always looking for support to launch some of these green technologies and products. But so to start with, where are you based, and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in EV World.
So I'm actually based in Omaha, Nebraska, which always kind of surprises people. I have been in doing work in patents for electric vehicles for a few years, where we have a company I consult for has patents in range extending for electric vehicles. And we were talking, and it seemed like it would be a good idea to maybe do something social media wise. And then I just happened to run into Bill Moore, who in 1998 started the evworld.com website. And he's been doing it since he was 50 years old. Okay, well, 20 something years later, he wants to step back a little bit. So I've taken over doing just the podcasting for it. So he still runs all of his own social media for EV World, but he's my co-host 2 days a week. I have an engineer who's a co-host 1 day a week, but we do a broadcast typically 3 or more days every week when we talk about everything from electric vehicles, which could be cars, planes, trains, boats, you name it, with bikes. There's all kinds of things in the electric space. We've even done electric heavy equipment, but we also talk about solar and wind and nuclear and biofuels and different things like that. And we'll also occasionally, we don't do it as much as we used to, but we'll touch on what's going on with the stocks in the electric vehicle space, whether it be Tesla, Lucid, Rivian, some of the others, what's going on with those. We also occasionally touched on stocks in the AI space, and that's been something nice that, we've done. And I've been able to get a lot of good people that have come on the show that I've interviewed that are maybe the CEOs of various companies that are in the electric vehicle space, whether they actually make electric vehicles or they make charging systems. And I've really gotten the opportunity to interview some amazing entrepreneurs in that space.
Wow, fascinating. So I have to say, I do want to go back in a little bit and talk about EV planes and boats, because that's something we don't typically hear a lot about. So, and we're going to later in the interview talk a little bit about your work also with nuclear, with kind of
Mhm.
the next generation of nuclear technology. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're working in fourth generation, which nothing that you see or know about current nuclear, when you think about a nuclear power plant, none of it is fourth generation. Okay, fourth generation is being done in about in a few other countries. The technology is proven, but the only true fourth generation commercial reactors currently in China, and we hope to do the first one in North America in Canada. So it's kind of a battle. All of the news, everything you see going in, it's still third generation. The fourth generation has been declared inherently safe. There's things where it can't melt down, it can't have a thermal runaway, you can't have a Chernobyl, you can't have a Fukushima, you can't have a 3 Mile Island, you can't have those kind of events. And it takes a lot of the human, almost most of your nuclear incidents have been human error, and it takes all of that out of the space. So it's really quite exciting. And the International Energy Agency declared that fourth generation nuclear is inherently safe, but and I'll put it in perspective, all of your major nuclear accidents happen with Gen 2 reactors. So there's
Oh,
not been a major incident with a Gen 3 reactor yet. Not
wow.
saying it couldn't be, it's not saying there couldn't be, okay? Um, but there hasn't been a major incident yet that affected people outside of the facility.
Wow, that's fascinating because I know there's so many breakthroughs with different technologies around generating electricity and power. So let's go back, and I do want to thank. He's not here with us today, Professor Alan Shatner from Green to Gold. He's kind of how we connected, and I think to date he's incubated about 400 different, green tech patents, IP, and sustainability manufacturing related organizations. So again, I'm really excited about circling back because I know you're creating some amazing content, and not just content, but really educating people and bringing. I would say you're kind of the cutting edge of what's happening with electric vehicles on a lot of ways. And definitely, in the future, as we do more live events, we would love to have the benefit of your presence and knowledge because, there's a lot of information and there's a lot of dis and misinformation out there too. So, so going back to electric vehicles, I was really fascinated when you said electric planes and boats. Can you share a little bit about what's happening in that sphere, and also the relationship to EV batteries? I know again that's a very dynamic area right now with a lot of things are happening with, um, increased distance and that type of thing. But yeah, fascinated about EV planes and boats and what kind of battery systems those might be currently using, kind of at the cutting edge of the EV world.
Well, let's start with a big myth about EV batteries. Okay, for starters, the batteries are heavy, right? We've all held batteries. We know how heavy even like a Duracell battery is for a flashlight, right? And when we get into batteries for cars and planes, yes, they're heavy. But one of the big things is the price of batteries for cars in the last 10 years has dropped 90%. Okay. For battery storage for solar, in the last 3 years, the price has dropped 80%. Okay. So there's a lot of things going on in the battery world that aren't really, nobody knows this. I mean, I know this, but when I say nobody, it's very few people outside of specifically the green energy space that really know what's going on. And so when I see policy being made in Washington, D.C., I'm oftentimes just, you guys aren't asking people who know. Okay. You're talking to the wrong people, or, or you're being subsidized too much by the oil and gas industry or whatever, which is at the heart of everything I'm kind of doing is kind of, it's not necessarily to be anti-oil, but it is, because everything I'm kind of doing is in direct competition with the oil industry to some degree.
And
Okay.
and thank you quickly, not to interrupt you for touching on that, because sometimes there is a little bit of a disconnect between policy and lobbying and things that are happening with legislation and kind of, people behind the curtain that are helping to pull the strings and have these influences. I mean, there's been, in my modest understanding, a lot of technology that's been available for a long time, but hasn't been able to come to market or patents have been bought up and stuff. So again, it's hard enough to work on these technologies, but trying to bring them to the public and to the world, sometimes it seems like it can be a little bit of a, like you said, a political bottleneck.
Oh, it absolutely is. And there's a lot of money in certain industries that could get disrupted, and they want to see their gravy train last as long as possible. I will say this, even though there's been, and I always hear this, that EVs are they're done or whatever, that their people aren't buying them anymore. But every year, more and more higher percentage of all new car sales in the world go up. Well, a lot of that is because the United States, outside of, let's say, the west coast of the US, is lagging behind the rest of the world, but in a major way. In a major way. Last year, 25% of all new car sales worldwide were electric. Okay.
Oh,
And yeah, but in the United States, it was 10%. In California, it was 25%. Okay. Now, California has one of the higher adoption rates actually in the world based on the size of California. Okay. There are the most electric vehicle adopted countries are all the Scandinavian countries, um, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. They've all been big adopters. However, in those countries, people don't drive cars the same way we do in the United States. The United States is a four-wheel car obsessed country, and we drive the largest vehicles pretty much of any country in the world. It's very normal to see. I mean, the F-150 is one of the best selling vehicles. The big Ford full size pickup truck is one of the best selling vehicles in the United States, and for many years it's been number one. And you don't see vehicles that size in other countries. In other countries, it's much more common to see two and three-wheel transport. But we were talking about aviation, and I'm sorry, I digressed. And so
oh,
in the space of,
this is all quite fascinating to me. So we can circle back in the future and do more. But
yes,
yeah, please
yeah,
continue your train of
yeah,
thought because this is really
yeah.
interesting.
So, but in terms of electric aviation, so we always heard, like if you watch the Jetsons or, cartoons, from years ago, we'd have flying cars by now or whatever. Well, they're here. They're here. They're called eVTOLs, or electric vehicle takeoff and landing. So essentially what you've got, if you think of one of your little quadcopter drones, these are simply electric, and they are capable of carrying five people in them. Okay, is
Wow.
essentially what they are. But they have more propellers, and they typically right now can do a flight that's less than an hour. Okay, and they're starting to take over, or I shouldn't say starting. They're starting to be locations in the Middle East, and there's an attempt that for the next Olympics in Los Angeles in 28 to make air taxi service a regular thing, but it's probably, I don't know that it's going to make regulatory issues in the US in the next 2 years. That's, something, and it's good. We need regulations, right? I mean, we don't
Right.
want technology to come prematurely. But on the flip side, I see where the United States lags behind in so many things behind other countries, particularly China. China says that they're going to have 100,000 personal electric aircraft by 2030.
Now,
Okay,
are these human driven or they're
human
um
driven. They're not drones.
yeah, because
So
I try
this,
to picture in my mind of all these. I mean, the highways can be crazy enough, but all these people now up in the air flying these vehicles through different
yeah,
um
think of
transportation.
a think of a motorcycle or a jet ski, but instead having four quadcopter, or having the quadcopter set up, lifting off and going for a flight and going for your trip. And that technology exists. It's just not mainstream yet. We're in 2025 now, and China says in 5 years they're going to have 100,000 of these flying around China. Okay.
Well,
um,
it is incredible. You talk about LA and the Olympics. That was
mhm.
not an EV vehicle going by the way. I think it was an F-250. Um, but of course, we're doing our big Earthstock Green Summit October 2nd through 5th in LA, primarily in Santa Monica and Venice area. But it is fascinating because on my recent trips, to see the Waymo self-driving vehicles, seeing, like you said, a lot of electric vehicles. And then even on top of that, the food delivery systems that you see kind
Mhm.
of going throughout the city. And now a lot of these food ordering kiosks that are all automated. So, when I look towards what's happening there and then look at the rest of the country, and sometimes even going backwards. Yeah, I know Governor Newsom and others were pushing for electric, like landscaping tools, and kind of decreasing gas powered, utilities and equipment. Which, again, there's been some pushback against that. But when we look at the U.S. compared to the world, and maybe the lack of political will and the adoption, I mean, people still here want to debate, is climate change real? So
Mhm.
um, it's a little disheartening, but like I said, with people like yourself doing the education and bringing this awareness to people, and again, the technology, hopefully at some point soon, the floodgates will open, and then people are going to realize really how essential it is to adopt some of these new technologies. But again, in that transition, it's like changing from an old paradigm and mindset to a whole new way. And sometimes it's hard to teach old dogs or the old paradigm new tricks as things quickly develop and evolve. So, in the time that we have, could you just mention a little bit about also EV boats? That's really fascinating to me. And are they just running on a charge? Is there onboard charging systems, so a boat can actually do a multiple day trip, or what's happening in that space?
So, in my opinion, in that space, you're going to see a number of technologies. So, your big cargo ships run on bunker fuel. This is the most carbon intensive, nasty smelling. In fact, in a lot of ports, you have to run diesel till you get out to sea, then you swap to bunker fuel. Okay, because you can't burn the bunker fuel too close to the coast. Okay, so it's the most polluting form of fuel that's used. But and I'm going to tell you that I'm not a lot of my stuff comes from an economics um, perspective. Okay, so I'm not always looking at everything from how green it is. Okay, but I'm looking at it from a market perspective as to what will work and what will really come to market. Because this is one of the frustrations is that you can have a great like green hydrogen. It's way cleaner than um, fossil fuels, right? The problem is it costs about 3 times as much to deliver to a customer. Okay, so
Mm.
the economics of hydrogen are just terrible. No matter all the things I see where people say Toyota's got this beautiful new hydrogen engine or Toyota's changing everything or whatever, it's still 3 times as expensive as buying gas. Okay, and it's really hard. I've seen some solutions that can almost bring it down to similar cost, but it's still not quite. It's more beneficial in a remote location. Like when I talk about nuclear energy, we have a way to produce hydrogen as an offshoot. It's still not cheap production, but if it's at somebody's facility that's 1,000 miles from the nearest fuel station, it's a better option than trucking diesel 1,000 kilometers to a mining facility. Okay, so there are uses for hydrogen, but when it comes to boats, I look at it like this, and one of the weird things is we've seen some great applications for cargo ships, actually for sailing ships. So forget the electric batteries, but they actually now can produce big mass that throw up gigantic sails that the captain just has to press a button instead of having 200 people to run out the rigging on everything like on an old sailing ship. The captain just has to press a button, the sails deploy, and he can put them back down. He can control everything from up in the ship. And those ships normally don't run very fast. And if they've got the wind with them, they actually may run faster than they normally run on fuel. So there's already some other technologies out there that are green that are being experimented with. But when you combine that with batteries, I think what's going to happen with boats, because of the enormous amount of energy that a boat requires, you're probably going to have some type of battery swapping technology. Um, and I've seen discussions about could we have battery swapping locations at like both entrances to the Panama Canal? Okay, could we have them in the Aleutians? Could we, as to where locations for this might exist? So there are ideas, but one of the big ones has always been talked about has been hydrogen for the boats. It's really hard to get the production cost of hydrogen to where, and that's one of the harsh realities of, the green environment is
Right.
it's hard to get people to adopt if it costs twice as much.
Right.
Okay. And so this used to be one of the criticisms of Tesla was that Tesla was only, owned by rich people who were pontificating to people who could, about how they should drive an EV. Well, that's not the case anymore. And remember, I mentioned earlier that the price of batteries has come down. Well, in 2 or 3 years, the economic reality is it's not going to make sense to drive a gas car anymore. Okay,
That is
because
great
EV,
news. That
yeah,
is great news.
whether we on September 30th we lose the $7,500 tax credit and the $4,000 tax credit for buying used EVs. Okay, that's at the federal level. So we're going to lose that. But the truth is, the battery prices keep plummeting. I have people tell me all the time, "Oh, a replacement battery costs as much as the car." It's like, well, no, that's not true now. They've dropped down to below $10,000, and probably in 3 years, a replacement battery might. This is the cost to the manufacturer, mind you, might only be like $3,000. Okay,
Well,
so they're
I know
probably
that
not.
was a big thing people were complaining about with the Priuses, and even in California, in some places, there was even like Prius battery thefts because of
Mhm.
the value of the batteries, and I know that's changed a lot too.
Yeah, yeah. The prices of batteries are plummeting. Lithium is not a rare earth mineral. Lithium is one of the most plentiful minerals on the planet. The thing is, most lithium that's sold commercially is mined in Australia. Most lithium is processed in China. So this is where the issue comes because China dominates both. 50% of their cars sold last year were electric. They're by far the biggest car market in the world, and they are electrifying at a huge pace. That one of the biggest things, if people have told me when they go to China now, is it's not as loud in the cities anymore because the electric
Wow.
cars don't make noise.
Yeah, I remember going to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for the big Earth Summit back in '92. That's where they actually established the Sustainable Development Goals. I actually
Hmm?
live in Crestone, which is a place Maurice Strong, who is the Attorney General of the United Nations, Secretary General, actually bought a huge property to do kind of a huge sustainable eco community type project. But I remember being in Brazil, I couldn't even see and breathe. There was just so much exhaust and so much diesel fuel excretions that it made it almost impossible to live. Not the image you get when you think of Brazil and the Amazon. Again, even though the Amazon's being deforested quickly. So so fascinating. I see it, my brain's already exploding. I've already learned a few things just
I got something else fascinating for you. So think about this. And I realize your audience is very, you know, climate friendly. Okay. But if they're talking to somebody who says they don't care about the climate, let's talk about school buses. So in the United States, there's something like 6,000 electric school buses running around. Well, in the communities that have adopted these, they've seen a noticeable drop in asthma among the kids. Well,
oh
because a lot of times the school buses aren't generally air conditioned. So the kids have the windows rolled down. What happens is the diesel's going back into the inside of the buses. And now that so many schools are running the buses this way, they solve that. And then down the road, as vehicle to grid. Do you know what vehicle to grid is, Michael?
no,
Okay, so what vehicle to grid is so you have all this solar and you have energy and everything. You can actually have your electric vehicle be hooked up with bidirectional charging on your house or to the grid, and your battery can act as an energy storage to power your house if you have a blackout or a brownout. Okay,
wow,
your car could power your house for probably about 3 days without being recharged. Okay, and run everything. Okay, now it depends if you have a bidirectional charger. You have to be able to push the energy back at that 220 volt, not at the 110. Okay,
right.
so yeah, like if you have a Ford F.
Which also solves a lot of problems because I know people that are working right now with the microgrids as far as like different types
Mhm.
of urban development projects. Because if we do look, I lived in Northern California, the Paradise Fire, the Grass Valley Fire, and the old infrastructure of a lot of some of these crumbling towers and cables, they are, and even the transformers, have been suspect and part of a lot of the creation of these wildfires. So the idea that it's becoming more localized, more regionalized, and what you're saying, even more independent of someone between their car and their home itself. Again, just fascinating breakthroughs. So in the few minutes we have left, and again, I want to have these conversations maybe monthly and definitely part of our live events.
Sure.
But I think people do want to know, and in the world of what I say information saturation, it's hard to get real information. Like every day I see stuff now about Japan and cars that run on water, and Tesla stocks are tumbling and all these types of stuff. It's kind of hard, especially now with AI and people just creating tons of high level
Understood.
content, which might not be true. It's hard to always get the benefit of someone from like you who knows really exactly what they're talking about in this industry. But before we finish, what would you say right now are some of the top electric car producers?
Well, I mean, obviously Tesla is the 800-pound gorilla, right? Musk is truly the leader, and despite how you may feel about some of the things he says or does or whatever, um, he's somebody I wouldn't bet against. That's for sure. Okay, if he's got some idea for a business, it's probably going to make money. Okay, he just really seems to get in on the very best ideas, and he puts his money into the very best ideas. But what's interesting is I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and we have this guy here that some people have heard of named Warren Buffett. Okay, owns a company called Berkshire Hathaway. And up until recent, I'm not sure if they finally did divest or not, but they were a 8% holder in BYD, which stands for Build Your Dreams. It's a Chinese car company, which is currently the number one electric vehicle car manufacturer in the world. They just passed up Tesla, but they only make either full battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. So they do make cars that do have gas motors, but they have plug-in hybrids, which, and a plug-in hybrid, you have a battery that runs the first 30 or so miles a day, which is a person's typical commute. Then you go back home and you charge it back up. But if you are driving more than that, it'll switch over to gasoline. Okay. But you've got several others. But it's interesting in the United States, you have a couple of, okay, so China has a cell phone company called Xiaomi. Okay. Xiaomi released a car a year or so ago called the SU7 that it's clearly a knockoff of a Porsche sedan.
Wow.
Okay, clearly a knockoff. I mean, you look at it, you would assume if somebody put Porsche badging on it, they would assume it was a Porsche. Um, it sold like 100,000 cars in the first few minutes it was available for sale. They delivered on those cars, no problem. Okay, in the United States, that'd be unheard of for somebody new to go into manufacture. It takes forever that to occur in the United States. They just released a new SUV. Once again, it's a Porsche knockoff. It looks like a mix between a Macan and a Cayenne. Okay, but it's another electric Xiaomi. Xiaomi, like I said, Xiaomi's a cell phone manufacturer. Okay, um, and it's they've had like 200,000 pre-orders for this car in the first 3 minutes it was available for sale.
Wow.
Okay, now to put that into perspective, and now the number two electric vehicle maker in the United States is General Motors. General Motors has a huge assortment they've got the Chevy Equinox, the Blazer, they have they have the Silverado and the Sierra pickups. They have the Hummer as the SUV and the pickup. They just have a whole lot of selection. Okay, that they didn't used to have. It used to just be the Chevy Bolt, right? And
Right.
now they have all these others. And they're supposed to bring back the Bolt. Um, then on top of that, Ford really only has three vehicles. They've got the Mustang Mach E, and they've got the Ford F-150 Lightning, and they got the Proline van. Okay, and so there's not really a whole lot else there. But when you look at somebody who's a pure EV maker, you have Rivian. Okay, and Rivian is catering to the people who might have been considering a Range Rover because the vehicle actually looks like a Range Rover. Okay,
Wow.
in my opinion, it's in the same price range. Okay. And then there's the Lucid, which is a former Tesla people, and they decided they wanted to compete and make a nicer version of the Model S, and it hasn't worked that well for them. So now they're coming out. They got a new SUV called the Gravity that's in the same price range as the Tesla Model Y, which the Tesla Model Y for the last 2 or 3 years has been the best-selling car on the planet. Not
Wow.
not the best-selling EV. It's been the best-selling car, period, in the world. Okay, so it's really hard to fathom that an American automaker has had the best-selling car. It's been outselling the Toyota Corolla, and it's not anymore. Right now, Tesla's having some struggles. And I think a lot of this is Elon's, messing in politics. It's
Yeah,
causing him a lot of
absolutely.
backlash.
Yep, absolutely. So if people want to find your podcast for EV World or the magazine, how would they do that?
It's easy enough. Just go to evworld.com, and you'll see in the top right there will be links to the most recent videos, and that'll take you right to our YouTube channel. You're more than welcome to follow along from there.
Well, amazing. I just want to swivel back to, again, October 2nd through 5th, we're doing this Green Summit in Santa Monica, and I'm actually having meeting with civic leaders there because, of course, in 2 years, the Olympics are coming, and I'm working with Professor Tratner and others right now in LA to position that by October, November of this year, especially with our kind of our micro summit, Earthstock Micro Green Summit. And a lot of times I say regenerative because it has a different um, connotation. If we say sustainability is kind of an older term that we can't just sustain anymore. We really have to like allow old systems and paradigms to kind of be the compost of innovation as we move forward. But we're looking at securing space to do kind of a green pavilion for the Olympics. So we're already being very proactive, and I've really enjoyed our time together here today. I've learned some amazing things. I'm sure our viewers will enjoy it. And I hope you enjoyed the fact I'm kind of just here enjoying a cool breeze right now. It's not 98 degrees here in Colorado. So just kind of here in my backyard in Crestone, Colorado. But thank you, David Neese, so much for your time. And I look forward to staying in touch and and even talking about more how we can, bring some more of this to light through the event in October.
I love it. Thank you, Michael, for having me on.
Great. Full circle. It took a while, but here we are. We're connected now.
Yep, no, that's awesome.
Thank you so
Love it.
much.